The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as Keisha Johnson walked out of Memorial Hospital, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. She had just finished a 12-hour night shift that had stretched into 14 hours, when a car accident brought in 3 patients right before her shift was supposed to end. As a nurse in the emergency room, Keisha was used to the unexpected, but that didn't make the long hours any easier. She paused outside the hospital entrance, stretching her back and taking in a deep breath of the cool morning air. Most of her co-workers hurried straight to their cars in the staff parking lot, eager to get home to their beds, but Keisha had always preferred to walk when the weather allowed it. The 20-minute journey through the quiet streets and the small neighborhood park helped clear her mind after the chaos of the emergency room. "Heading home finally, Keisha?" called out Dr. Patel as he walked toward the hospital, coffee in hand and looking far too cheerful for 7 a.m. "Yes, and not a minute too soon," Keisha replied with a tired smile. "That pile-up on the highway kept us busy all night." "You did great work in there," he said, raising his coffee cup in a small salute. "Get some rest. You deserve it." Keisha nodded her thanks and set off down the sidewalk. At 32, she had been working at Memorial for nearly 8 years. The hospital sat on the border between 2 very different neighborhoods. The wealthy area of Hillcrest to the north with its large homes and manicured lawns, and West Side, where Keisha lived, with its mix of small older houses and apartment buildings. The economic divide was stark, and Keisha crossed it twice daily on her commute. As she walked, her mind drifted to the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen counter. Rent was due next week, and her car needed repairs she'd been putting off for too long. Her younger brother Tyler was starting community college this fall, and she had promised to help with his books. Their mother had raised them alone after their father died when Keisha was 14, and now that Mom was battling arthritis and working reduced hours at the grocery store, Keisha tried to help out whenever she could. "Should pick up a couple extra shifts this month," she murmured to herself, mentally calculating how many hours she'd need to cover everything. The thought made her shoulders sag a little more. The overtime pay was good, but the extra hours were taking a toll. Keisha's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her mom. "Hope your shift wasn't too crazy. Don't forget Sunday dinner. Tyler's bringing his new girlfriend." A small smile lifted the corners of her mouth as she typed back a quick reply. Sunday dinners at her mom's small house were sacred, the one time each week when they could all be together despite their conflicting schedules. She slipped her phone back into her scrubs pocket and continued walking. Instead of taking her usual route straight home, Keisha decided to cut through Maple Park. It would add about 5 minutes to her walk, but the trees and flower beds would be a welcome change from the sterile hospital corridors. Plus, at this early hour, the park would be nearly empty. Just a few joggers and dog walkers getting an early start. The moment she stepped onto the park's winding path, she felt some of the tension ease from her body. Birds chirped in the branches overhead and dew still glistened on the grass. Keisha took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of earth and growing things instead of antiseptic and illness. As she walked, her thoughts turned to her future. She'd been thinking about going back to school for her master's degree, maybe becoming a nurse practitioner or even a nurse anesthetist. The additional qualifications would mean better hours and significantly better pay, but the cost of tuition was daunting, and finding time to study while working full-time seemed impossible. One thing at a time, she reminded herself, the way her mother always did when problems started to pile up and feel overwhelming. Just get through this month first. Keisha's worn sneakers crunched against the gravel path as she approached the small pond in the center of the park. A pair of ducks glided across the water's surface, creating gentle ripples that caught the early sunlight. She paused for a moment to watch them, envying their seemingly simple existence. An elderly man on a bench nodded to her as she passed, recognizing her scrubs. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly. "Just doing my job," she replied with a small smile, though the acknowledgement warmed her heart. In the 2 years since the pandemic, people had become more appreciative of healthcare workers, though that hadn't necessarily translated to better working conditions or pay. Exiting the park, Keisha found herself on Cherry Street, which would lead her through 3 more blocks to her apartment building. The neighborhood was waking up now, cars starting, people heading to work, a mail carrier already making early deliveries. She waved to Mrs. Washington, who was watering the impressive collection of potted plants on her tiny front porch. You just getting home, child? Mrs. Washington called out, shaking her head. They work you too hard at that hospital. It pays the bills, Keisha replied with a shrug and a smile. How's your grandson doing at college? Made the dean's list. Mrs. Washington beamed with pride. First in our family. That's wonderful, Keisha said, genuinely happy for her neighbor. Tell him I said congratulations. As she continued down the street, Keisha thought about her own education. She had worked so hard to get through nursing school, studying late into the night while working part-time at a convenience store, applying for every scholarship she could find, stretching every dollar until it screamed. Her mother had been so proud when she graduated, tears streaming down her face as Keisha walked across the stage to receive her diploma. You did it, baby, she had whispered fiercely when they hugged afterward. You really did it. The memory gave Keisha a second wind as she approached her apartment building, a 3-story brick structure that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. The rent was reasonable and the location was convenient, just a few minutes' walk from the bus line if the weather was too bad to walk to the hospital. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, her legs protesting after being on her feet for so many hours. Reaching her door, she fumbled with her keys, dropping them once before managing to get the right one into the lock. Inside, her apartment was small but cozy. The living room flowed into a tiny kitchen, with a short hallway leading to the bathroom and single bedroom. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she had made it a home with colorful throw pillows, family photos, and a few houseplants that somehow survived despite her irregular schedule. Keisha dropped her bag by the door and kicked off her shoes with a sigh of relief. She peeled off her scrub jacket, tossing it into the laundry basket she kept in the hallway specifically for her work clothes. In the kitchen, she opened the refrigerator and stared at the meager contents. Too tired to figure out what to eat, finally settling on yogurt and a banana, she sat at her small kitchen table and scrolled through her phone as she ate, catching up on news and messages she'd missed during her shift. A text from her friend Denise caught her eye. Girls' night Saturday? We haven't seen you in ages. Keisha sighed. She had barely seen her friends in months, always either working or recovering from work. Her social life had dwindled to Sunday dinners with her family and occasional text conversations. She typed back, I'll try. Depends on my schedule, knowing even as she sent it that she would probably end up picking up an extra shift instead. After eating, she dragged herself to the bathroom for a quick shower, washing away the hospital scent that seemed to cling to her skin and hair. The hot water revived her slightly, but as she dried off and slipped into her comfortable sleep clothes, exhaustion hit her like a physical weight. Her bed had never looked so inviting. Keisha set her alarm for 4 p.m. She needed to get some errands done before her next shift started at 7, and crawled under the covers. Outside, the world was fully awake now, traffic noise increasing as the morning rush hour began. But inside her darkened bedroom, Keisha was already drifting off to sleep. Her last thoughts before unconsciousness claimed her were a jumble of patients' faces, bills to be paid, and a fleeting wish for something to change, something to make all the hard work and long hours feel more worthwhile. But what that something might be, she couldn't say. Perhaps it was just a desire for rest that wasn't interrupted by the shrill demand of an alarm, or maybe it was a deeper longing for purpose beyond the daily grind of survival. Whatever it was would have to wait. For now, sleep was all Keisha could handle. Deep, dreamless sleep that would prepare her, however inadequately, for another day much like this one. Another day of helping others while wondering who was looking out for her. Little did Keisha know that in just a few hours, her ordinary life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. But for now, in this quiet moment of rest, the future with all its unexpected turns remained hidden. Waiting to unfold, the shrill beeping of Keisha's alarm jerked her awake at 4 p.m. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented in the afternoon light filtering through her blinds. Her body ached for more rest, but she forced herself to sit up, knowing that if she hit snooze even once, she might not get up until it was time for her next shift. All right, she muttered to herself, silencing the alarm. Let's get moving. After splashing cold water on her face and changing into jeans and a comfortable t-shirt, Keisha made a quick to-do list. Grocery store, pharmacy to pick up her mom's prescription, maybe a stop at the library to return the medical journal she'd borrowed. If she hurried, She could get everything done and still have time for a proper meal before heading back to the hospital. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright, the September heat still clinging to the air despite the approaching fall. Keisha slipped on her sunglasses and headed toward the small shopping center 6 blocks away. The neighborhood was alive with after-school activity. Kids riding bikes, teenagers hanging out on stoops, parents returning from early shifts. Keisha's phone buzzed with a text from her brother Tyler. "Can I borrow your car tomorrow?" "Mine's still in the shop." She typed back a quick, "Yes, but I need it back by 6 for work," as she walked. Tyler was responsible, but she made a mental note to check the gas level before handing over the keys. Her brother was notorious for returning vehicles with empty tanks. The pharmacy was her first stop. Mr. Chen, the pharmacist, greeted her by name. "How's your mother doing with that new medication?" he asked as he rang up her purchase. "It seems to be helping with the pain," Keisha replied. "She's moving a little easier these days." Good. "And you look tired," Keisha laughed. "Thanks for noticing." "Double shift yesterday." Mr. Chen shook his head sympathetically. "You take care of yourself too, not just everyone else." It was advice Keisha heard often but rarely followed. As she left the pharmacy, she mentally calculated how much of her paycheck would be left after helping with her mom's medical expenses. Not much, but they'd get by. They always did. The grocery store was crowded with after-work shoppers. Keisha navigated the aisles efficiently, grabbing only what she needed: eggs, bread, some fruit, and a few frozen meals for nights when she was too tired to cook. At the checkout, she carefully counted out her money, leaving the fancy coffee creamer she'd been eyeing on the conveyor belt when she realized she was over budget. "Sorry," she told the cashier with a small smile. "Not today." Arms full of bags, Keisha decided to skip the library. The journal wasn't due for another week, and she could feel her energy flagging. Better to head home, have some food, and rest a bit more before her shift. But as she passed Westside Elementary School, she paused. The playground was still busy with children from the after-school program, their laughter and shouts filling the air. Keisha found herself smiling as she watched them play. She'd gone to this same school as a child, had played on that same playground. Some things hadn't changed much in 20 years. As she stood there, memories washing over her, a small commotion caught her attention. A little girl with bright beads in her hair had created a paper airplane and was launching it repeatedly from the top of the playground slide, giggling each time it swooped through the air. "Look how far it goes, Ms. Diane," the child called to a tired-looking teacher who was trying to round up the other children. "That's nice. Zoe, it's almost time to go inside," the teacher called back, not really looking. Keisha smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. She remembered making paper airplanes with Tyler when they were kids, competing to see whose would fly the farthest. Her brother always won until Keisha discovered a special folding technique in a library book. Lost in the memory, Keisha almost didn't notice when the girl's airplane sailed over the low fence surrounding the playground. The child's face fell as her creation glided toward the street. "My airplane," the girl cried, scrambling down the slide. Something about the way the child moved, the determination in her small body, the complete focus on her toy, sent a chill of premonition down Keisha's spine. She was already moving, already dropping her grocery bags when the girl slipped through a gap in the fence that the adult supervising hadn't noticed. "Hey, stop," Keisha called. But the child was fixated on the paper airplane that had landed in the street. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion then. The little girl darted into the road, her small sneakers slapping against the asphalt. From around the corner came the rumble of an engine, a delivery truck moving too fast, the driver's eyes not on the road but glancing down at something in his lap. Keisha didn't think. Her body moved on pure instinct, fueled by adrenaline and the absolute certainty that if she didn't act, something terrible would happen. She lunged forward, feet pounding against the sidewalk, then the street. She could see it all with terrifying clarity. The truck still approaching, the driver now looking up, but his expression shifting too slowly from distraction to horror, the child bending to pick up her paper airplane, completely unaware of the danger bearing down on her. "Watch out," someone screamed, and Keisha realized distantly that it was her own voice. 3 more strides and she reached the girl, her arms wrapping around the small body, lifting her off the ground. The truck's horn blared, a deafening sound that seemed to fill the entire world. Keisha tucked the child against her chest and threw herself sideways, away from the truck's path. She felt the rush of air as the vehicle missed them by inches, heard the screech of brakes being applied too late. Then she was rolling on the ground, curled protectively around the little girl, her body taking the brunt of the impact with the asphalt. For a moment, there was silence, or perhaps Keisha simply couldn't hear through the rushing of blood in her ears. Then sound came crashing back, people shouting, the truck driver's door slamming, running footsteps. Oh my God, are you okay? Someone was kneeling beside them. Keisha uncurled slowly, checking the child in her arms before herself. The little girl's eyes were wide with shock, her lip trembling. But she appeared physically unhurt. You're okay, sweetheart, Keisha said softly, her nurse's training kicking in as she quickly assessed the child. You're okay. I've got you. The girl began to cry then, big tears rolling down her cheeks as the fear caught up with her. Keisha held her close, rocking slightly, murmuring reassurances. Zoe. Oh my God, Zoe. The teacher was there now, face pale with shock and fear. What happened? Is she hurt? I think she's just scared, Keisha said, her own voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. She ran into the street after her paper airplane. As she spoke, Keisha became aware of her own pain, the burning scrape along her arm where she'd hit the pavement, the throbbing in her shoulder, the tear in her jeans revealing bloodied skin beneath. But none of that mattered compared to the precious weight of the child in her arms, alive and whole. The truck driver hovered nearby, his face ashen. I didn't see her, he kept saying. I swear I didn't see her. I was just checking the GPS for my next delivery and then, you could have killed her, snapped a bystander, a man in a business suit who had stopped his car. You were speeding in a school zone and not watching the road. More people were gathering now. Someone had called 911 and in the distance Keisha could hear sirens approaching. The school principal had come running out and was now carefully taking Zoe from Keisha's arms, checking her over with frantic movements. You saved her life, the man in the suit said to Keisha, his voice filled with awe. I saw the whole thing from my car. Another second and... He didn't finish the sentence. Keisha just nodded, the reality of what had just happened beginning to sink in. Her hands were shaking now, the delayed shock setting in. She looked down at her torn clothes, at the blood beginning to seep through the fabric. Ma'am, are you hurt? The ambulance is coming. A teenage boy was kneeling beside her now, offering a bottle of water. I'm fine, Keisha said automatically, the response of someone used to caring for others rather than being cared for. Really, I'm a nurse. It's just some scrapes. But when she tried to stand, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The boy caught her arm, steadying her. Maybe sit back down until the paramedics get here, he suggested gently. Across the gathering crowd, Keisha caught sight of Zoe, now wrapped in the principal's arms but looking back at Keisha with wide eyes. The child raised one small hand in a tentative wave. Despite everything, the pain, the shock, the ruined clothes and spilled groceries, Keisha found herself smiling and waving back. The sirens grew louder, and red and blue lights flashed at the end of the street. As the ambulance pulled up, Keisha took a deep breath. This wasn't how she'd planned to spend her few hours off. But as she watched the little girl being comforted by the adults around her, she knew she wouldn't have done anything differently. Some part of her, the practical part that was always counting pennies and hours, wondered how this would affect her ability to work tonight. Another part, deeper and more essential, knew that some things were beyond calculation. The worth of a child's life, the instinct to protect, the split-second decisions that reveal who we truly are when there's no time to think. As the paramedics approached, Keisha squared her shoulders. Whatever happened next, she could handle it. She always did. The wail of sirens filled the air as an ambulance and 2 police cars converged on the scene. Keisha sat on the curb, still slightly dazed, watching as paramedics rushed toward them. Her nurse's training had helped her stay calm during the crisis. But now that the adrenaline was fading, her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Over here, someone called to the paramedics, pointing toward Keisha and the little girl who was now sitting beside her, still sniffling but no longer crying. You were so brave, Keisha told Zoe softly, trying to distract her from the commotion. That was a really good paper airplane, too. Did someone teach you how to make it? Zoe nodded, her beaded braids clicking gently. My daddy showed me. He says I make the best ones in my whole class. I believe that, Keisha said with a smile. My little brother and I used to have contests to see whose airplane could fly the farthest. Did you win? Zoe asked, momentarily forgetting her fright. Not until I checked out a special book from the library that showed all the best folding techniques. Then I won every time. The child's eyes widened. There's a book about paper airplanes. Before Keisha could answer, the paramedics reached them, setting down their equipment. A woman with kind eyes crouched in front of them. "Hi there," she said. "I'm Lisa. What are your names?" "I'm Keisha." "This is Zoe," Keisha answered, noticing how the child pressed closer to her side. "Well, Keisha and Zoe, we heard you had quite a scare. Can I check to make sure you're both okay?" While one paramedic gently examined Zoe, Lisa turned her attention to Keisha. "Those are some nasty scrapes you've got there. Let's clean them up." Keisha winced as the antiseptic solution stung her raw skin. Her right arm had taken the worst of it, with a long scrape from elbow to wrist. Her left knee was also bleeding through the tear in her jeans, and her shoulder throbbed where she'd hit the pavement. "I'm fine, really," Keisha insisted. "I've had worse falling off my bike as a kid." "Uh-huh," Lisa said, clearly not convinced. "Any dizziness? Blurred vision? Did you hit your head?" "No, nothing like that," Keisha said. "Just scrapes and bruises. I'm a nurse at Memorial." "I'd know if something was seriously wrong." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "A nurse, huh? Then you know better than to downplay injuries. Let me finish cleaning these wounds properly." While the paramedics worked, police officers were speaking with witnesses, including the truck driver who still looked shell-shocked. The teacher from the after-school program was on the phone, presumably with Zoe's parents, her face pale and voice shaky. The school principal, a tall woman with gray-streaked hair, approached Keisha. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't been there—" She shook her head, unable to complete the thought. "I'm just glad I was walking by," Keisha replied. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered, kept at a distance by a police officer. Keisha noticed an expensive-looking car parked haphazardly across the street, its driver's door still open as if someone had abandoned it in a hurry. But she couldn't see who it belonged to in the growing crowd. "Looks like you'll live," Lisa said with a small smile, finishing the bandage on Keisha's arm. "But you should have someone drive you home, and maybe take tomorrow off work." Keisha almost laughed at that. Taking time off wasn't an option, not with bills piling up. "I'll be fine. My shift doesn't start until tonight anyway." A police officer approached, notebook in hand. "Ma'am, I need to get your statement about what happened here." Keisha recounted the events as clearly as she could, describing how she'd seen Zoe run into the street after her paper airplane, and how the truck had appeared around the corner. "The driver was looking down at something," Keisha added. "A phone or GPS, maybe. He didn't see her until the last second." As she spoke, a black SUV screeched to a halt near the scene, and a woman leaped out, her face contorted with fear. "Zoe, where's my baby?" "Mommy," Zoe called out, running toward the woman who scooped her up in a fierce embrace. Keisha watched as the mother clutched her daughter, tears streaming down her face. Over the woman's shoulder, Zoe pointed toward Keisha. "That lady saved me, Mommy. She flew like a superhero." The description brought a tired smile to Keisha's face. It certainly hadn't felt like flying, more like desperate lunging and painful tumbling. But if that's how Zoe saw it, who was she to correct her? Zoe's mother approached, still holding her daughter tightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what I would have done if—" She trailed off, squeezing Zoe even closer. "I'm just glad she's okay," Keisha replied. "Are you hurt?" The school called and said there was an accident, but they didn't say much else. "I was so scared, just a few scrapes. Nothing serious." The police officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we'll need a statement from you as well, and from your daughter if that's okay. And there's the matter of filing charges against the driver." As the officer led Zoe's mother away, Keisha noticed her abandoned grocery bags. Some of the contents had spilled onto the sidewalk, and the eggs were certainly broken. She sighed, knowing she didn't have the money to replace everything. But at least the bread and frozen meals seemed intact. She started to stand, intending to gather what she could salvage when a wave of dizziness hit her. Maybe Lisa had been right about someone driving her home. "Whoa, take it easy," a deep voice said as strong hands steadied her. It was the man in the business suit who had stopped his car earlier. "You should sit back down. I need to get my groceries," Keisha explained, "and then head home. I have to get ready for work." The man looked at her in disbelief. Work? After what just happened? Bills don't pay themselves, Keisha said with a shrug that she immediately regretted as pain shot through her shoulder. The man studied her for a moment, then nodded. At least let me help you gather your things and give you a ride home. It's the least I can do after witnessing what you did today. Keisha wanted to refuse. She didn't make a habit of accepting rides from strangers, but her body was beginning to feel the full impact of her heroics. Every muscle ached and the thought of walking 6 blocks suddenly seemed impossible. All right, she conceded. Thank you. I live over on Maple Street. The man gathered her groceries, salvaging what he could, while Keisha finished giving her statement to the police. When she mentioned having to get to her night shift, the officer gave her his card. Call if you need anything or if you start feeling worse. What you did today was extraordinary, Ms. Johnson. As the crowd began to disperse, Keisha noticed that the ambulance was leaving without her. Lisa gave her a thumbs up through the window and Keisha waved in return. The paramedic had insisted on writing down care instructions for her injuries, even though Keisha had assured her she knew how to clean and bandage a scrape. Zoe and her mother were still talking to the police, but the little girl broke away for a moment to run back to Keisha. Thank you for saving me, she said solemnly, then threw her small arms around Keisha's waist in a tight hug. Keisha bent down, ignoring the pain, to return the hug. You're very welcome. Just be more careful next time, okay? Stay away from the street. Zoe nodded, her expression serious. I promise. And I'm going to look for that airplane book at the library. With a final wave, the child returned to her mother, who mouthed another thank you to Keisha over her daughter's head. The business-suited man approached with Keisha's grocery bags. I'm all set if you are. My car's right over there. As they walked toward his vehicle, an expensive model that probably cost more than Keisha made in a year, she realized she didn't even know his name. I'm Keisha. By the way, she said, extending her uninjured hand. Daniel, he replied, shaking it firmly. Daniel Wilson. The drive to Keisha's apartment was quiet, both of them processing the events of the afternoon. When they arrived, Daniel insisted on carrying her groceries to the door. You should really take tomorrow off, he said, as he handed over the bags. Not an option, Keisha replied with a tired smile. But thanks for the ride and the help. Daniel hesitated, then reached into his pocket and produced a business card. If you need anything, medical bills, time off work, please call me. What you did today, not everyone would have risked their own safety like that. Keisha took the card out of politeness, doubting she would ever use it. Anyone would have done the same, she said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Inside her apartment, Keisha finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. She sank onto her couch, wincing at the pain in her shoulder, and looked at the clock. Just 2 hours before she needed to leave for her shift at the hospital. With a groan, she forced herself to her feet and shuffled to the bathroom to assess the damage. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized. Hair disheveled, clothes torn and dirty, bandages on her arm and a developing bruise on her cheekbone she hadn't even noticed before. What a day, she murmured, turning on the shower. As the water heated up, she glanced at Daniel's business card still clutched in her hand. The embossed lettering read, Daniel Wilson, CEO, Wilson Investments. Keisha raised her eyebrows, then set the card on the counter with a small laugh. Well, look at that. Saved a kid and got a ride from a CEO all in one day. Little did she know, this unexpected encounter was just the beginning of something that would change her life forever. 3 days had passed since the accident, and Keisha was finally starting to feel like herself again. The bruises had bloomed into impressive purple patches across her shoulder and hip, but the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. She'd worked her scheduled shifts at the hospital despite her supervisor's concerned looks and offers to find coverage. Can't afford to miss the hours, Keisha had explained with a tired smile, and her supervisor hadn't pushed the issue on her. Way out after finishing a particularly grueling night shift, Keisha checked her phone for the first time in hours. There were 3 missed calls from her mother, a text from Tyler asking if she'd seen the local news, and most surprisingly, a voicemail from Memorial Hospital's administrative office. She listened to the message as she walked to her car, frowning slightly as the polished voice of Susan from HR asked her to come in for a meeting at 2 p.m. that day. No explanation, just a request to confirm she could attend. What's this about? Keisha muttered to herself. too tired to feel more than mild curiosity. Had someone complained about her? It seemed unlikely. She'd been professional as always, despite working through her injuries. Maybe it was about the insurance paperwork for her medical expenses from the accident. After calling her mother to assure her that yes, she was fine, and no, she didn't need to come over with homemade soup again, Keisha headed home for some much-needed sleep. She woke just after noon, groggy but aware that she needed to get moving if she was going to make the mysterious meeting at the hospital. As she showered and dressed, she wondered idly if she should be worried. In her experience, unexpected meetings with administration rarely brought good news. Choosing a simple blouse and slacks, more formal than her usual off-duty clothes but not overly so, Keisha tried to quiet the anxiety building in her stomach. Whatever this was about, she would handle it with the same steady calm she brought to emergencies in the ER. The administrative offices at Memorial Hospital occupied the top floor of the East Wing, far removed from the bustling activity of patient care. Keisha rarely had reason to visit this part of the building, with its plush carpeting and framed artwork on the walls. Keisha Johnson to see Susan in HR, she told the receptionist, who smiled and asked her to take a seat in the waiting area. The magazines on the glass coffee table were all glossy business publications, nothing like the dog-eared entertainment magazines in the staff break room. Keisha picked one up and flipped through it absently, not really reading the articles about investment strategies and corporate leadership. "Ms. Johnson?" Susan appeared in the doorway, perfectly coiffed and smiling warmly. "Thank you for coming in. If you'll follow me." Instead of leading Keisha to her office as expected, Susan guided her down the hall to the large conference room typically used for board meetings. Keisha's apprehension grew. Why would a simple HR matter require the formal conference room? "Go right in," Susan said, opening the door. "They're waiting for you." "They?" Keisha stepped into the room and froze in surprise. Seated at the far end of the long table was a man she recognized, Daniel Wilson, the CEO who had given her a ride home after the accident. Beside him sat a small figure whose beaded braids clicked together as she turned. "It's the superhero lady," Zoe exclaimed, jumping out of her chair with a huge smile. Daniel rose more sedately, but with equal warmth in his expression. "Miss Johnson, thank you for coming." Keisha stood motionless for a moment, trying to make sense of the scene. "I don't understand. What is this about?" "Please have a seat," Daniel said, gesturing to a chair. "I apologize for the secrecy. I wasn't sure you'd come if you knew it was me asking to meet with you." Slowly, Keisha moved to the offered chair. Zoe immediately scooted her own seat closer, looking up at Keisha with undisguised admiration. "I told my dad all about how you saved me," the girl said earnestly. "He said you could have gotten really hurt." Daniel cleared his throat. "What my daughter is trying to say in her own way is that we owe you a tremendous debt, one I've been trying to figure out how to repay." Keisha shifted uncomfortably. "There's no debt, really. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Daniel said firmly. "They wouldn't. I saw it happen, remember? I was across the street, having just dropped Zoe off at the after-school program. I was on a business call in my car when I heard the commotion." His voice grew quieter, more intense. "I watched you drop everything, literally everything you were carrying, and run toward danger while everyone else froze or backed away. I watched you calculate in a split second where that truck would be and how to get my daughter out of its path." Keisha looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. "The thing is," Daniel continued, "by the time I got across the street, you were already talking to the paramedics, and then the police needed statements, and in the confusion, I didn't get a chance to really talk to you. Just that brief ride to your apartment. I didn't even realize Zoe was your daughter," Keisha admitted, pieces falling into place. The expensive car abandoned across from the school, the business suit, the CEO business card. "Of course. Dad's been trying to find you for days," Zoe chimed in. "He called the hospital and the police and everybody." Daniel smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "What she means is that I've been trying to properly thank the woman who saved the most important person in my life." The intensity of his gaze made Keisha uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not from someone like Daniel Wilson, whose name she now realized she'd seen in business news and charity gala photos. "Really, Mr. Wilson? Daniel, please." "Daniel, I appreciate the thanks, but it's not necessary. I'm just glad Zoe is okay." "I got a new paper airplane book," Zoe informed her seriously. "Dad took me to the bookstore the very next day, and I'm only allowed to fly them in the backyard now." "That sounds like a good rule," Keisha said with a smile. Daniel leaned forward. "Ms. Johnson, Keisha, I understand your reluctance. You're not someone who acts heroically for recognition or reward. That's clear from everything I've learned about you." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "Learned about me?" Daniel had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. But yes, I've made some inquiries. I know you're one of the most respected nurses in the ER. I know you help support your mother and brother. I know you've been wanting to further your education, but haven't been able to due to financial constraints. How did you?" "I have resources and connections," he said simply, "and I wanted to understand the woman who saved my daughter's life." Keisha felt a flash of indignation at this invasion of her privacy, but before she could respond, Daniel continued. "I'd like to establish a scholarship in your name at the nursing school of your choice. Full tuition for your master's degree, plus a stipend for living expenses so you don't have to work such punishing hours while you study." The words hung in the air between them, almost too enormous for Keisha to process. A full scholarship? No more choosing between education and paying bills? It seemed impossible. I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "Say yes," Zoe suggested helpfully, making both adults smile despite the emotional weight of the moment. "There's more," Daniel said. "I'm establishing a foundation focused on pedestrian safety around schools and high-traffic areas. We'll fund infrastructure improvements, education programs, and advocate for stronger distracted driving laws." He paused, watching Keisha's reaction. "I'd like you to be part of it, on the board if you're willing. Your perspective as both a healthcare professional and someone who's witnessed firsthand the consequences of distracted driving would be invaluable." Keisha's mind was reeling. This went far beyond a simple thank you. This was life-changing. Too life-changing to process in a moment. "This is very generous," she said carefully, "but it's a lot to take in. I need time to think." Daniel nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He slid a folder across the table to her. "All the details are in here. My personal contact information is on the first page." As Keisha reached for the folder, Zoe suddenly jumped up. "I made something for you, too." The girl dug into a small backpack at her feet and pulled out a colorful handmade card. The front featured a crayon drawing of what appeared to be Keisha with superhero cape, swooping down to grab a small figure with beaded hair. Inside, in careful child's handwriting, it read, "Thank you for saving me. You are my hero. Love, Zoe." Something caught in Keisha's throat as she looked at the card. The simple sincerity of the child's gratitude touched her in a way that all of Daniel's grand gestures hadn't quite managed. "Thank you," she said softly to Zoe. "I'll keep this forever." As they rose to leave, Daniel hesitated. "One more thing. I know your family means a lot to you. I'd like to invite all of you to dinner this weekend, you, your mother, and your brother. Nothing formal, just a chance for me to thank them too, for raising someone like you." The invitation surprised Keisha almost as much as the scholarship offer. "I'll ask them," she said, "but I think they'd like that." After they left, Keisha remained in the conference room, staring at the folder in front of her. Through the window, A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "It was Susan from HR. Everything okay?" the woman asked. Keisha nodded slowly. "I think so. It's just not what I was expecting." Susan smiled knowingly. "Mr. Wilson can be quite persuasive when he wants to be. For what it's worth, I think you deserve every bit of what he's offering, and then some." As Keisha gathered her things and headed for the elevator, she felt as if she were walking in a dream. 3 days ago, she'd been counting pennies to make ends meet, wondering if she'd ever find a way to advance her career without going into crushing debt. Now, with a simple folder tucked under her arm and a child's crayon drawing carefully placed in her purse, everything had changed, and it had all started with a paper airplane and an Instinctive leap toward danger rather than away from it. 6. Months had passed since that life-changing afternoon when a paper airplane had fluttered into traffic and altered the course of multiple lives. The crisp fall day had given way to winter, and now to the first promising buds of spring. Keisha stood at the window of her new apartment, watching the sunrise paint the city in gold and pink hues, a cup of coffee warming her hands. So much had changed that sometimes she had to pause and remind herself that it was all real. The apartment was the smallest of the changes, a practical upgrade from her old place, closer to both the university and the hospital. But it symbolized the larger transformation in her life, a stepping stone rather than just a place to crash between exhausting shifts. Her phone buzzed with a text from her classmate. "Ling, don't forget to bring your research proposal to study group. And coffee." "Definitely coffee." Keisha smiled and typed back a quick reply. The master's program in nurse anesthesia was as challenging as she'd expected, but for the first time in her life, her only job was to learn. No juggling multiple shifts, no counting pennies until payday, no choosing between textbooks and groceries. Daniel's scholarship covered everything: tuition, books, even a modest living stipend. Her mother had cried when Keisha explained the scholarship. "All these years watching you work yourself to the bone," she'd said, wiping her eyes. "Someone finally sees what I've always seen in you." The dinner that weekend at Daniel's home had been awkward at first. Keisha's mother had worn her church dress and Tyler had put on a tie, both clearly intimidated by the sprawling house in Hillcrest with its manicured lawn and circular driveway. But Zoe had broken the tension, running to greet them and immediately dragging Tyler off to show him her paper airplane collection. By dessert, her mother was exchanging gardening tips with Daniel's housekeeper, and Tyler was deep in conversation with Daniel about his business classes at community college. The walls between their worlds, built by circumstance and economics, had begun to crumble over homemade apple pie. A knock at her door pulled Keisha from her memories. She opened it to find her brother, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt that still had creases from the store packaging. "Ready for your big day?" Tyler asked, stepping inside and immediately heading for her coffee maker. "Nice outfit." "Very professional." Keisha glanced down at the navy blazer and pencil skirt she'd chosen for her first official board meeting at the Wilson Foundation for Pedestrian Safety. "Too much?" "Nah, you look great. Like someone who should definitely be telling rich people how to spend their money." She swatted his arm playfully. "It's not like that." "I know," Tyler said more seriously. "It's important work. I'm proud of you, see?" Sss. The foundation had moved quickly from idea to reality, with Daniel leveraging his connections and resources. Already they had funded crosswalk improvements at 3 schools, including Westside Elementary, and launched a campaign against distracted driving that was gaining national attention. Keisha's role had started as largely symbolic, the heroic nurse who saved the founder's daughter, but she'd quickly proven her value. Her healthcare perspective and practical knowledge of the community had shaped the foundation's initiatives from the beginning. Today's meeting would consider expanding their work to other cities, starting with those that had the highest pedestrian accident rates. "You know, Mom's telling everyone at church about her daughter, the Big Shot Foundation director," Tyler said, gulping down coffee. "I'm not a director, just a board member," Keisha corrected him. "And I'm still just me." Tyler shook his head. "No, you're not. You've changed." For a moment, Keisha felt a pang of worry. Had success separated her from her family, from her roots? But Tyler continued, "You're still the same Keisha who raised me when Mom was working double shifts. Same Keisha who quizzed me for tests and made me believe I could go to college. But you're not tired all the time anymore. You laugh more. You're doing what you were meant to do instead of just surviving." The simple observation brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "When did my little brother get so wise?" "Around the same time my big sister started changing the world," he replied with a grin, checking his watch. "Speaking of which, we should get going. Don't want to be late for the people whose lives you saved." The foundation's offices occupied a bright, modern space downtown. As Keisha walked through the open-plan workspace with Tyler, several staff members greeted her by name. In the conference room, Daniel was already setting up for the presentation, while Zoe sat nearby, legs swinging as she colored in a workbook. "Keisha." The girl abandoned her coloring and ran over for a hug. At 8 years old now, Zoe had lost some of her baby softness, but none of her enthusiasm. "Did you see the new posters?" They have your picture on them. Keisha had indeed seen the awareness campaign materials featuring her image alongside statistics about pedestrian safety. It still felt strange to see her face on billboards and bus shelters, but Zoe thought it was the coolest thing ever. I did see them, Keisha said, smoothing the girl's hair. What are you working on today? Math, Zoe replied with a dramatic sigh. Dad says I have to finish before we go to lunch. Daniel looked up from his laptop with a smile. Rules are rules. Hello, Keisha. Tyler, thanks for coming in early. Over the past months, a comfortable friendship had developed between them. Daniel had become a mentor to Tyler, offering career advice and eventually a part-time position at his investment firm, while Tyler finished his degree. For Keisha, he was a partner in the foundation work, respectful of her input and genuinely interested in her perspective. There had been moments, brief glances or lingering conversations, that suggested the potential for something more. But neither of them had acted on it. Both focused on their respective priorities, Keisha on her studies and the foundation, Daniel on raising Zoe and running his business. I brought the community survey results, Keisha said, setting her portfolio on the table, and Tyler has some ideas about reaching younger drivers. As the other board members began to arrive, Keisha felt a familiar surge of purpose. This work mattered. It might prevent another child from running into traffic, another family from receiving devastating news, another driver from living with the guilt of a preventable accident. After the meeting, which had gone even better than expected, with unanimous approval for the expansion plan, Daniel suggested they celebrate with lunch. As they walked to his car, Zoe skipping ahead, he spoke quietly to Keisha. Remember when you said anyone would have done what you did that day? Keisha nodded. I've thought about that a lot, Daniel continued. About how we tell ourselves that story, that anyone would step up in a crisis. But the truth is, most people don't. They freeze, they hesitate, they look to others to act. You didn't. He glanced at his daughter, now examining a flower bed with intense interest. You know, Zoe asks about you even on days when we don't see you. She told her teacher she wants to be a nurse when she grows up. She'll probably change her mind a dozen times before high school, Keisha said with a smile. Maybe, but the impact you've had on her life goes beyond that one moment. You've shown her what courage looks like, what it means to put others first. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before he added, You've had that same effect on me. You know. Before Keisha could respond to this unexpected admission, Zoe called out, Dad, Keisha, look at this butterfly. It's the first one this spring. They joined the girl, crouching down to admire the delicate creature resting on a newly bloomed flower. Watching Zoe's face light up with wonder, Keisha felt a profound sense of rightness. One split-second decision had connected their lives in ways she could never have imagined. That evening, as she prepared for her study group, Keisha found herself thinking about the larger pattern that had emerged from that chaotic day 6 months ago. A life-threatening moment had transformed into life-affirming connections. A chance encounter had created opportunities not just for her, but for her family, for the communities served by the foundation, for drivers who might think twice before looking at their phones behind the wheel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Zoe wants to know if you'll come to her science fair next week. I told her you're probably busy with school, but she insisted I ask. Keisha smiled and typed back, Wouldn't miss it. Tell her I expect a full demonstration of her project. As she gathered her books and notes, Keisha caught a glimpse of Zoe's crayon drawing, now framed on her wall. The child's depiction of her as a superhero had embarrassed her at first, but over time she'd come to see it differently. Heroism wasn't about capes or superpowers. It was about being awake to the moment, about seeing a need and responding without calculation. It was about the ripples that spread outward from even the smallest actions. A hand extended, a life protected, a future preserved. Sometimes those ripples changed the world in ways you could never predict. Sometimes they brought you exactly where you needed to be. The foundation had moved quickly from idea to reality, with Daniel leveraging his connections and resources. Already they had funded crosswalk improvements at 3 schools, including Westside Elementary, and launched a campaign against distracted driving that was gaining national attention. Keisha's role had started as largely symbolic, the heroic nurse who saved the founder's daughter, but She'd quickly proven her value. Her healthcare perspective and practical knowledge of the community had shaped the Foundation's initiatives from the beginning. Today's meeting would consider expanding their work to other cities, starting with those that had the highest pedestrian accident rates. You know, Mom's telling everyone at church about her daughter, the Big Shot Foundation director, Tyler said, gulping down coffee. I'm not a director, just a board member, Keisha corrected him. And I'm still just me. Tyler shook his head. No, you're not. You've changed. For a moment, Keisha felt a pang of worry. Had success separated her from her family, from her roots? But Tyler continued. You're still the same Keisha who raised me when Mom was working double shifts. Same Keisha who quizzed me for tests and made me believe I could go to college. But you're not tired all the time anymore. You laugh more. You're doing what you were meant to do instead of just surviving. The simple observation brought unexpected tears to her eyes. When did my little brother get so wise? Around the same time my big sister started changing the world, he replied with a grin, checking his watch. Speaking of which, we should get going. Don't want to be late for the people whose lives you saved. The Foundation's offices occupied a bright, modern space downtown. As Keisha walked through the open-plan workspace with Tyler, several staff members greeted her by name. In the conference room, Daniel was already setting up for the presentation, while Zoe sat nearby, legs swinging as she colored in a workbook. Keisha. The girl abandoned her coloring and ran over for a hug. At 8 years old now, Zoe had lost some of her baby softness, but none of her enthusiasm. Did you see the new posters? They have your picture on them. Keisha had indeed seen the awareness campaign materials featuring her image alongside statistics about pedestrian safety. It still felt strange to see her face on billboards and bus shelters, but Zoe thought it was the coolest thing ever. I did see them, Keisha said, smoothing the girl's hair. What are you working on today? Math, Zoe replied with a dramatic sigh. Dad says I have to finish before we go to lunch. Daniel looked up from his laptop with a smile. Rules are rules. Hello, Keisha. Tyler, thanks for coming in early. Over the past months, a comfortable friendship had developed between them. Daniel had become a mentor to Tyler, offering career advice and eventually a part-time position at his investment firm, while Tyler finished his degree. For Keisha, he was a partner in the Foundation work, respectful of her input and genuinely interested in her perspective. There had been moments, brief glances or lingering conversations, that suggested the potential for something more. But neither of them had acted on it. Both focused on their respective priorities, Keisha on her studies and the Foundation, Daniel on raising Zoe and running his business. I brought the community survey results, Keisha said, setting her portfolio on the table. And Tyler has some ideas about reaching younger drivers. As the other board members began to arrive, Keisha felt a familiar surge of purpose. This work mattered. It might prevent another child from running into traffic, another family from receiving devastating news, another driver from living with the guilt of a preventable accident. After the meeting, which had gone even better than expected, with unanimous approval for the expansion plan, Daniel suggested they celebrate with lunch. As they walked to his car, Zoe skipping ahead, he spoke quietly to Keisha. Remember when you said anyone would have done what you did that day? Keisha nodded. I've thought about that a lot, Daniel continued. About how we tell ourselves that story, that anyone would step up in a crisis. But the truth is, most people don't. They freeze, they hesitate, they look to others to act. You didn't. He glanced at his daughter, now examining a flower bed with intense interest. You know, Zoe asks about you even on days when we don't see you. She told her teacher she wants to be a nurse when she grows up. She'll probably change her mind a dozen times before high school. Keisha said with a smile. Maybe, but the impact you've had on her life goes beyond that one moment. You've shown her what courage looks like, what it means to put others first. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before he added, You've had that same effect on me. You know. Before Keisha could respond to this unexpected admission, Zoe called out, Dad, Keisha, look at this butterfly. It's the first one this spring. They joined the girl, crouching down to admire the delicate creature resting on a newly bloomed flower. Watching Zoe's face light up with wonder, Keisha felt a profound sense of rightness. One split-second decision had connected their lives in ways she could never have imagined. That evening, as she prepared for her study group, Keisha found herself thinking about the larger pattern that had emerged from that chaotic day 6 months ago. A life-threatening moment had transformed into life-affirming connections. A chance encounter had created opportunities not just for her, but for her family, for the communities served by the foundation, for drivers who might think twice before looking at their phones behind the wheel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Zoe wants to know if you'll come to her science fair next week. I told her you're probably busy with school, but she insisted I ask." Keisha smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. Tell her I expect a full demonstration of her project." As she gathered her books and notes, Keisha caught a glimpse of Zoe's crayon drawing, now framed on her wall. The child's depiction of her as a superhero had embarrassed her at first, but over time she'd come to see it differently. Heroism wasn't about capes or superpowers. It was about being awake to the moment, about seeing a need and responding without calculation. It was about the ripples that spread outward from even the smallest actions. A hand extended, a life protected, a future preserved. Sometimes those ripples changed the world in ways you could never predict. Sometimes they brought you exactly where you needed to be.